Hey guys, what is up and welcome to a new League of Legends video. So I'm sure most of you have a pretty decent idea on the mages coming out next week. But I'm sure most of you haven't really seen too much gameplay on what Riot called the smaller rework champions. So maybe someone like Annie, Veigar, Xerath, Syndra, and all those guys. So I thought it'll be a pretty cool idea to make a top 5 list of the mid-season mage update, giving you guys an idea on which ones I think will be the overpowered mages once they finally hit the live servers. So I picked the 5 mages not only from the big 6 changes, but also from all of the 8 smaller changes. And I think some of you may be surprised as to who I put in the number 1 spot. So this is going to be my personal opinion after experiencing these mages on the PvE server. Again, this is still my more or less first impressions, and things may change by the time these guys finally hit the live servers, such as buffs or nerfs. But this should still give you a pretty decent idea on which of the several mages that got reworked you should be looking out for and keeping an eye on. So right before we jump into the number 5 spot, the question of the video is, which of the updated mages do you believe will be the most overpowered? And if you end up enjoying this video guys, please make sure to hit that like button to let me know. But without further ado, let's go right into the number 5 spot. So here I decided to start things off with Annie, who in my opinion arguably got bigger changes than some of what Riot considered to be the big 6. Annie is looking quite strong right now because not only did she get some very nice small buffs like the increase on the range on her W, but she also got some slightly bigger changes. For instance, her E ability will no longer give her resistances, but now it will instead give her damage reduction for 3 seconds, up to 40% damage reduction at rank 5. You don't need me to tell you that if you time this ability very well, you can negate some serious damage, and this ability could potentially be a little bit overpowered. Something else that also happened to Annie is that she did not get any damage reduction on her Q or W, her 2 main damage spells that are not her ultimates, because a lot of the other mages that got reworked have got reduced damage on these abilities. But let's talk about the main thing, what really makes Annie finally feel like a somewhat new champion, and what I arguably think is a bigger rework than some of the other big 6 changes. Her Tibbers is now much more vital in her rotation and just the role that it overall plays. Whenever Tibbers is summoned, whenever you stun a champion with your passive of course, or whenever Annie dies, Tibbers becomes enraged for 3 seconds, gaining a huge increase to his attack speed and his move speed. Or in other words, he acts like a truly mad bear and just mauls at his opponents. This actually adds quite a bit of damage because Tibbers will do a lot of damage to the target, especially once you summon him on top of them. And if you were to get a Rylai's Crystal Scepter, well, this will make things even more annoying. But I also really like the fact that you can proc this enraged effect while you're still having the Tibbers summoned by again stunning a champion in a teamfight. But on top of Tibbers being essentially busted, he also ends up regenerating HP whenever he's out of combat, and he also regenerates a huge amount of HP whenever Annie dies, which definitely helps him on top of the extra move speed and attack speed he'll gain to get that final bit of damage done and maybe even pick up a kill before he also dies. And something I found a little less noticeable is the fact that Tibbers' AI has been improved. Now whenever I die and Tibbers ends up trying to find someone to kill just before he dies as well, I did notice that he seems to act quite well. But other than that, the AI for Tibbers doesn't really seem to be that much better for me, or at least in the experience that I personally had. But the negatives of the Annie rework is the fact that she is going to be a little less bursty, because the initial damage when you summon Tibbers and also the AoE fire damage that Tibbers has been reduced. And at the end of the day guys, Annie is still Annie, so if the game lasts just simply way too long, you are going to be feeling a little bit helpless. Either way, the rework is fantastic. I love what they did to Tibbers. Annie didn't really get any nerfs whatsoever either, and she just feels like a really cool fun champion now. Moving along to the number 4 spot is going to be Cassiopeia. So she is part of the big 6 changes that Riot has announced, and I have to say I was really pleasantly surprised with what I saw. She felt really strong when I played her on the PvE server, and her new passive where she slowly gains move speed but can no longer buy boots is also really cool because it opens up a new slot or an extra slot for another AP item. Her Q damage has been increased very slightly for the base damage, but it has gotten a huge increase in the AP ratio, and the move speed offered by her Q does feel much more impactful to me. Her W is another unique ability within her kit that just feels like you would pick it to counter many champions, so for instance something like a Lucian Dash. It also looks really cool, it does a lot of damage, it still slows, and it just is a very useful ability. But the main thing to talk about without question is her E now, because not only does it make last hitting in the laning phase very easy, since it now refunds all of the mana if the E ability kills the target, but you no longer have to have the target poisoned in order to be able to spam this ability, which feels really nice. However, if the person is poisoned, well, you're gonna be doing a lot more damage to them, on top of also healing up a very respectable amount of HP. So overall, her laning phase feels a little bit easier. She scales like an absolute beast monster into the late game because of the extra AP item slot she now has, and also the huge AP ratio scaling she now has. But moving along to the negatives, the mana costs on her Q and E ability are very high. The W cast is gonna be very awkward until you get used to it, of course, since it is a fixed distance and it does stop at walls. Her Baron and Dragon clear speed is gonna be a little bit slower now, just because of how her new ability interacts with the cooldown, and the slow offered by her ultimate is a little bit lower, but it's not all that bad. All in all, I'm definitely expecting Cassiopeia to be very popular because she felt very strong to me on the PvE server. Alright guys, moving into the number 3 spot and starting off the top 3 of this list is going to be Malzahar. Now at first I was going to put him in the number 1 spot, but I realized that there's another champion that instantly deserved the number 1 spot the second I tried him. And I have to say he's really close to being in the number 2 spot. But either way guys, let's talk a little bit about the new Malzahar. So he's definitely a very strong champion and his passive is insanely annoying to deal with. It's like a very overpowered Banshee's Veil mixed with Yasuo's passive. It's a 90% damage reduction for 1.5 seconds and the next ability of course that gets hit on him, and it also absolutely ignores any CC for the first ability and also for the next 1.5 seconds. But I don't even feel like that's the most annoying thing about him, because that has to be his W without question. He can now summon a Voidling at will, and if they have the extra move speed because of the E ability, well, these things are going to be replicating like bunnies on mating season. They do a lot of damage, they push in the wave like madman, they also proc Rylai's Crystal Scepter, and this ability is what his whole kit now revolves around. It's all about setting up the perfect W, using your ultimate to have about 3, 4, or even 5 of these Voidlings just wail away at your opponents. These things will help you clear Dragon and Baron insanely fast as well, and trust me, it's really strong. But on top of this, his Q ability got a little bit of a buff when it comes to the mana cost and the cooldown, and his E ability also received some mana buffs. One thing that I thought was really cool is the fact that his E ability now gets the duration refreshed with your Q or R ability. So think of it like this: if you put your E ability on the enemy champion and it's about to run out, maybe it has 1 second left before it stops, if you hit them with your Q or your ultimate, that E ability that has been on them instantly resets back to 4 seconds. This is really important, especially with Rylai's Crystal Scepter and your W, to keep this constantly on them, to have your Voidlings constantly on the target, getting the extra move speed and forcing them to replicate, because you want to get over 3 so that the Voidlings get an increase in attack speed. His ultimate now is fantastic when it comes to shredding tanks because it does do the percent damage, and believe me guys, I would be a little scared to face this guy once he goes on the live server. He really is annoying. However, the negatives of Malzahar is the fact that he did get a lot of damage nerfs on his abilities. He's no longer the burst mages, especially since his ultimate is now strictly percent damage. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, it just means that his playstyle has been altered from a potential burst mage to now a very annoying sustained damage summoning type mage. He has also been getting nerfs after nerfs on the PvE server, and I'm expecting a little bit more. Either way, this guy felt really strong to me and he felt very annoying to face. Moving into the number 2 spot is a champion I feel like some people expected to see in the number 1 spot, but trust me, the champion I have in the number 1 spot is definitely deserving of it. So Vladimir, let's talk a little bit about this vampire guy. Now a lot of people were worried about him because, well, Spellvamp got removed. But let me reassure you guys, the changes that Riot did to Vladimir are justified. He is definitely still very strong. And the fact that he doesn't need to rely on these Spellvamp items makes it even better. Currently, Vlad's laning phase is considered to be extremely poor and a lot of champions simply outzone him. But luckily for him, the new Q ability will help him a little bit with that, because whenever you get that third Q, not only do you do an insane amount more damage, well actually twice the damage, but you also heal a ridiculous amount of HP, especially if you land it on a champion. So a lot of people will be scared of your third Q because of the sheer amount of damage and sustain it offers. And then you have his E ability, which has been completely reworked to the point where I actually think it's fantastic. Not only does it look really cool, but it also does an insane amount of damage. You can charge it up to the max duration if you so choose. At that point, it'll not only do a ridiculous amount of damage, but it'll also slow. Or you can release it early to do less damage and also not provide the slow on the enemy champion. But whichever one you choose, know that it will do a lot of damage, it will be very annoying. It has huge potential in team fights, it has a decent wave clear as well, and it can also be combined with his W. To me, this was one of the most impactful abilities I have used out of all of the mage reworks, and I was really happy to use it because it's just so much fun and it feels so darn good. And then you have his ultimate, which now heals Vladimir based on the damage it did. So if you time your abilities properly and you have the ultimate proc the damage on top of using your third Q, you can heal about half HP instantly. Overall, this guy is definitely not someone you want to mess around with because he's very strong, he'll scale very well, his laning phase is also better. But with all that said, let's talk about the negatives. His E ability does not go through units, so it's fairly easy to block. Think of it as being very similar to how Ashe's W ability works. Whenever you're not using the empowered Q, it's actually weaker than it currently is on the live server. His ultimate does do a little bit less damage, and his AP to HP passive scaling has also been lowered. But either way, this guy I'm definitely expecting to be a very popular pick once it hits the live servers. And the number one spot has to, without question, go to Veigar. Now, I'm sure most of you are surprised that the number one spot was not taken by one of the 6 bigger changes. Well, I have to say the changes that they did do to Veigar are quite, well, they're interesting. This guy is legitimately going to be absolutely overpowered broken. Now currently we all know and love Veigar because he scales really well, he constantly gets AP over and over again from stacking up his Q, and I mean that's what we love Veigar for, right? Well, why not make that even more stupid? Why not remove his passive that was pretty useless before, where it just gives him a little bit of mana regen that almost feels negligible, and instead give him an insanely overpowered stacking AP passive. Because now whenever Veigar lands any one of his abilities, yes, you heard that correctly, any one of his abilities, that's his Q, his W, his E, or his R, on a champion, he gets 1 AP. So yes, that definitely means you can land your stun on a champion and get an AP. Yes, it means you can land your Q on a champion in the laning phase and get an extra AP. And yes, it also means you can land your Q, kill a minion, and hit the champion for harass and get AP from both of them. Let me put it this way, when I was playing him on the PvE server, I had just over 200 AP gained from the passive alone 20 minutes in. 2 items in, I had over 600 AP. So I mean, yeah, it's pretty damn strong. Oh, but wait, there's more. He also has lower mana on his Q, his W, his E, and his R abilities, so pretty much every single ability he has. And his ultimate now works well against all champions, not just mages. Because now it no longer does bonus damage based on the AP the enemy champion has. No. Instead now, it just does damage based on the missing HP. It essentially has become an execute ability, to the point where if the champion is less than 33% HP or 1/3 of their HP, it will deal an insane amount of damage. Or to be more specific, 650 base damage plus 1.5 scaling AP. So yes, this is going to be a very scary champion. Yes, I'm expecting some nerfs to happen to him on the PvE server. If not, then well, prepare to meet Veigar's true form. However, the negatives, with the few that there are, he actually does gain a little bit less AP from his Q whenever he kills monsters or minions. And he's a little bit less of a mage killer now, since obviously his ultimate doesn't do bonus damage based on how much AP the opponent has. But trust me, it doesn't really matter because you will have a truckload of AP, you will be essentially destroying anyone's face. And if anyone ever falls below 1/3 of their HP, they better hope they can somehow avoid your ultimate. champions. But that right there, guys, is about it for this video. Now you have a general idea on which mages you should be looking out for once they finally hit the live servers. And that is my list of the mages I predict to be overpowered. So if you guys did enjoy this video, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't, make sure to share this with your friends, as I'm sure a lot of people are probably wondering which of the mages of the several reworked mages you should be looking out for and which ones are the scariest. Also, make sure to check out my other videos as well if you haven't yet. And here are my favorite answers from the previous video's question where I asked, which one champion would you play on Earth? But thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you for the next video. Peace.